The verdict had been read at the third bell, and by the fourth the room was already emptying, and by the fifth sub-coordinator Threlva Yasun of the Vraxen Concord was alone with the smell of old carbon and human sweat, and the small, cold fact that she had testified the captain into a cell. She did not move when the last Marine pulled the hatch shut. She sat at the witness bench with her four-fingered hands flat on the steel and her tertiary eye half-lidded. The flag on the bulkhead said Terran Outer Reach Detachment, and below it the unit patch of the Black Cantata, a long dark wedge of a ship in profile 7-gun cupolas she had spent 70 days walking past on her way to the wardroom. The recording lamp at the judge's desk was still lit. Nobody had thought to switch it off. Threlva watched it the way a child watches a wound stop bleeding. She did not know how long she sat there. She had been on this human ship long enough to lose the habit of counting in her own units. She had said, on the bench, with her translator at the lowest formal register, "In the 70 days I served under him, Captain Renatus Holm gave 17 orders I considered tactically irrational, 4 orders I considered procedurally improper, and 1 order that, in my honest professional judgment, I believed would have endangered the vessel and her crew." The flag judge advocate had asked her to clarify which one. She had clarified. She had given the date and the rotation and the bridge watch and the exact phrasing the captain had used. And she had given her own counter-argument, and she had given the executive officer's silence, and she had given the moment Lieutenant Commander Brask had laid his hand on his sidearm and said, evenly, "Captain, stand down. I am relieving you under Article 41. She had given all of it. She had given the room. And then she had stepped down from the bench, and the panel had whispered for 9 minutes. And the lead judge had said the words that came back to her now like the last note of a long bell. The court finds Captain Renatus Holm fit for medical discharge in absentia. The relief of command on day 70 was lawful, proper, and necessary under Article 41. The court commends Lieutenant Commander Aldrich Brask. This panel is adjourned. That had been the verdict. She had survived it. She had walked back to the witness bench and sat down and not stood up again. She did not know why the dread had not lifted. It should have lifted. She had told the truth. The truth had been heard. The right human had been removed from the helm of a ship the Vraxen Concord had agreed to send an observer aboard. In exchange for a study berth and a long list of small humilities the Concord had been very willing to swallow. She had done her duty. She had done it precisely. Her membranes should be loosening now. They were not. They were tightening, slowly, the way they tightened when a Vraxen child, very small, hears a sound it does not recognize on the far side of a closed door. Threlva opened her tertiary eye and made herself look at the empty bench where Captain Holm had sat through 3 days of testimony with his hands folded and his mouth shut. She made herself remember his face. He had not looked at her when she gave her statement. He had looked at a point above the lamp, and his jaw had not moved. The dread tightened another notch. She stood. Her knee joints clicked. She did not pick up the slate. She walked to the hatch. The corridor outside was empty. The duty officer at the end of the gangway saluted her, a flat-handed Terran salute, learned for her benefit, and she returned it the Vraxen way, with the small dip of the tertiary eye, and she walked past him toward Bay 9, where the Black Cantata sat in the salvage cradle, fueled, scrubbed, and waiting for the man the panel had just named to take her out again. That man was Aldrich Brask. He had been Holm's second. He had relieved Holm at the helm. He had testified for 3 days that Holm was unfit. He had answered every question without raising his voice. The court had commended him. The fleet would give him the cutter. Tomorrow he would lift the Black Cantata out of the cradle and back into the long, thin lane the Concord had no name for, the lane that ran toward the Vale 8 stretch, where the 70-day voyage had ended in a ready-room arrest, and a sealed packet and a comm officer who had walked aft looked Threlva in the face and said, very quietly, "He was right, ma'am. He was right about all of it." Threlva had not known what to do with that. She still did not. She walked the long way to Bay 9. She did not go in. She stood at the inner glass of the observation gallery and looked through it at the Black Cantata in her cradle, the 7-gun cupolas closed, the long dark wedge of the bow pointing toward the open dock seal, and she let herself, for the first time since the verdict, count what she actually knew. She knew this. The cruise had been Holm's idea, 4 times routed, stamped with a captain's discretion clause. For 67 days the voyage had run clean. On day 68 Holm had ordered a course change off pattern into a corner of Vale 8 the chart marked as null and refused to explain. On 69 he had ordered silent running. On 70 at 0352 ships, he had stood at his command station and said, flat and calm, that he was going to take the Black Cantata into the null and shut down her transponder and not come out for any reason short of an answered countersign. Brask had relieved him on that line. Holm had not resisted. He had handed Brask the bridge key, walked off the bridge, locked himself in his ready room, and not eaten for the rest of the voyage. On day 73, the cutter had docked at the Salt Spire under tow. Brask had filed the Article 41 report on the way in, and Holm had been walked off the gangway in restraints she had not been able to look at. She knew what she had testified. She knew what the comm officer had said to her on the gangway, very quietly, in the noise. He was right, ma'am. He was right about all of it. Threlva pressed her palms against the cool glass of the observation gallery and looked at the long, dark wedge of the cutter in her cradle and tried deliberately, the way her trainers in the Concorde Academy had taught her, to put her own dread into a category. The category did not come. She tried again. It did not come. She closed her tertiary eye and breathed the human air, which was thin and cool and smelled of metal, and she thought about the 70 days, slowly, in order, the way a juror is supposed to think about a verdict before it is delivered, not after. She thought about the day she had come aboard. The day she had come aboard had been a bright day in dock, by which she meant the dock lamps had been running at full intensity, because the Black Cantata had been finishing her last loadout under a clock. Holm had met her at the airlock himself. He had been a tall man, gray at the temples, with a tight, straight mouth and very still eyes, and he had shaken her hand the human way and not flinched at the cold of her skin. He had said, "Subcoordinator, welcome aboard. I will not waste your time, and I do not expect you to waste mine. The ship runs on 3 rules. 1. When the watch officer says hold, you hold. 2. When I say silence, the silence is for everyone, including you. 3. If you see anything in our procedures that strikes you as foolish, you log it with the executive officer at end of watch, and we discuss it before the next bell. We do not argue on duty. We do not theater. Are we clear, Subcoordinator?" She had said they were clear. She had liked him on first reading. He had reminded her of her own grandfather, a man who had run a small Concord ferry between 2 moons for 40 years and who had never raised his voice and never lost a hull. She had not been ready for what came on day 68. She had had no warning at all. She opened her tertiary eye and looked again at the cutter and thought, deliberately, of the 17 orders she had logged as tactically irrational. She could only remember now 4 of them. That should have alarmed her. It did not yet. She put it aside. She thought of the 4 procedural improprieties. She could remember 2. She thought of the one she had testified about, the course change off pattern on day 68. She remembered that one very clearly. Holm had been at his command station with the cold coffee in his left hand and his right palm flat on the console plate, and he had looked at the helm officer and said in his ordinary voice, "Helm, new heading, 273 by 019er, bring her to half flank. Continue silent running. Do not log the change to the cruise file." She had been standing at the observer's railing behind the helm. She had said, quietly into her own translator, "Captain, the new heading places us off the patrol pattern and into a chart null sector. Per Concorde Terran liaison protocol, I am required to ask the rationale." Holm had not looked at her. He had said, "Subcoordinator, stand down. The rationale is captain's discretion. The clause is in your liaison packet. Read it tonight." He had not been rude. He had not been warm. He had been exactly as he had been on day 1 and on day 40 and on every day in between. And yet she had logged the order with Brask at end of watch the way she had been told, and Brask had read her log and his jaw had worked once, and he had said, very quietly, that he would discuss it with the captain at breakfast. She did not know what had been said at breakfast. Brask had not told her. But on day 69 the captain had given the silent running order, and on day 70 he had told the bridge he was going to take the cutter into the null and not come out, and on the morning of the 71st day the cutter had been under Brask's command and headed home. She thought all of that through, standing at the gallery glass, the way a court was supposed to think. She thought of the comm officer's voice on the gangway. He was right, ma'am. The dread in her membranes was a long cold thread now. It ran from the soft skin under her jaw down between her shoulder blades and pooled, slowly, at the small of her back. She did not yet know what the dread meant. She made herself walk down the gallery to the inner hatch of Bay 9, and she keyed her observer's tag against the panel, and the hatch side open, and she stepped onto the dockside walk that ran along the length of the Black Cantata's port flank. The cutter was 411 meters long. Built 37 years ago, refit twice, named for an oratorio Threlva had not heard. 7th of her class, 3 sisters gone, 3 on patrol. None had survived the engagements the Black Cantata had survived. None had been commanded by Holm. She walked the length of the hull and stopped at the bow. She made herself look at the small white inspection seal on each closed weapon port she passed. Each one said the weapon inside had been opened, inspected, cleaned, and closed within the last duty cycle. Each one said the ship was, as the manifest claimed, ready to lift. Threlva did not know, yet, why she had begun checking. She knew she had begun. She walked back the length of the cutter and stopped at the inner hatch of Bay 9 and stood there with her palm against the cool steel of the Black Cantata's flank. And she let herself finally ask the question. She asked it in Concord formal, in her own language, in her own head, because the translator could not have rendered it, and she did not want it rendered. If the captain was right, what was he right about? The dread in her membranes pulled tight and held. The dock lamps overhead cycled. The shift was changing. Somewhere down the gallery, a Marine was laughing about something a junior rating had said. The Black Cantata's flank under her palm was cold. Threlva closed her tertiary eye. She thought very deliberately of the comm officer. Sabra Innes had been the last person to speak to Captain Holm before Brask relieved him. Sabra Innes had been the comm officer who, on day 69, had received Holm's order to shut down all outgoing traffic. Sabra Innes had been the one who had walked aft down the gangway at the Salt Spire 3 days ago, found Threlva at the secondary airlock, and said the things she had said. Sabra Innes was on the cutter now. She had been retained in her post by Brask. She was prepping the comm room for tomorrow's lift. Threlva opened her tertiary eye, turned on her heel, and went looking for her. The comm room of the Black Cantata was 3 decks down and amidships, a narrow blister built into the spine of the ship between the secondary fire control trunk and the auxiliary scrubbers, and it smelled, always, of the ozone of cold relays, and the faint sweet rot of the polymer seals that had been laid in around the cable trunks. The year the cutter was launched, Threlva had been in the comm room on her first ship tour and on her 6th duty rotation, and she had stood at the back of it during the silent running orders on day 69, and the room had not changed. Sabra Innes was at her station with her hood up and her feet under her chair. The way Threlva had learned was the human posture for a long, careful task. She did not look up when the hatch side opened. She did not look up when Threlva stopped at the back of the room and stood deliberately in the place an observer was supposed to stand. She finished a sequence on her panel, a slow, careful sequence that ran for 9 breaths, and only then did she swivel half a degree on her stool and look at Threlva over the rim of her hood. Sub-coordinator, comm officer. They had not used each other's names since the gangway. Threlva had not used Innes's name on the bench. She had said only the comm officer. The court had not asked who the comm officer was. The court had not, in fact, asked very much about the comm officer at all. Sabra Innes looked at her for a long count and then said evenly, "You came down here for a reason. You said something to me on the gangway," Threlva said, 3 days ago, as I was disembarking. "I did," Innes said. "I would like you to say it again." Innes looked at her panel for a moment. She did not move. The cold relays hummed. Somewhere down the cable trunk, a status board pinged once and went quiet. Then she said, "He was right, ma'am. He was right about all of it." Threlva kept her tertiary eye fixed on Innes's face. "About what?" Innes turned slowly back to her panel, as if she needed both hands on the rim of the console to say the next thing. "The course change on 68, she said. "The silent running on 69. The dark run he tried to put us on for 70, all of it. You believe the captain's order on day 70 was correct?" "I know it was. You did not say so on the bench." "No, ma'am." "Why not?" Innes did not answer for a long count. Then she said, "Because the court asked me about Article 41, ma'am. The court did not ask me what the captain saw. What did the captain see?" Sabra Innes was very still. She turned, finally, her whole body, and looked at Threlva with the small, dark human eyes that had been watching screens for 19 years. "He saw the index, ma'am." Threlva did not know the word. She did not know it in Concord, and she did not know it in Terran, and she did not know it in the 4 trade pigeons her translator carried. The translator, when she queried it under her jaw, returned the word with the small green flag that meant proper noun, no gloss available, classification unknown. The green flag, in Threlva's training, was a flag she had been taught to respect more than any other. The green flag meant the speaker was using a name for a thing the Concord did not have a category for. Threlva lowered her chin a quarter centimeter, which was the Vraxan sign for go on. Sabra Innes went on. It started on day 51, she said. I was on the long watch. I caught a packet that should not have been a packet. It was on a band that nobody uses anymore. The old Concord Scout band, the one your service decommissioned 12 years ago. It was very weak. It was repeating. It was a single string of 7 syllables looped. The translator said it was a survey ping. I logged it as anomalous, and I walked up to the bridge and I handed the log to Brask. He read it. He gave it to the captain. The captain read it. The captain went back to his ready room, and he did not come out for 6 hours. Did the captain tell you what the 7 syllables were? No, ma'am. He told the bridge that the packet had been astray. He told the bridge to disregard. He told me, personally, very quietly, after the watch, that I was to flag any further packets on that band and bring them to him directly, or log them anywhere. You agreed. I did, ma'am. How many further packets did you receive? Sabra Innes looked at her panel again. 11, she said. In how many days? 16. All on the old Concord Scout band. All of them, ma'am. All on the same band. All in the same 7 syllables. All weaker than the last. Until day 65. Then they began to grow stronger. By 67, the packet was loud enough that any junior comm officer with a fresh translator could have caught it. And on 68, Threlva said very softly, the captain changed course. Yes, ma'am. Toward the source of the packet. Away from it, ma'am. Threlva held the forefinger pad of her right hand very still on the cool steel of the bulkhead and felt the cold thread in her membranes pull a notch tighter. Away? Yes, ma'am. The new heading was the opposite vector. 273 by 019er is the exact reciprocal of the packet source. The captain wanted to put as much distance between the cutter and the source as he could. He wanted to do it on silent running. He wanted to do it without logging the change to the cruise file, because the cruise file is uplinked to Fleet every 6 rotations, and if Fleet saw the change, they would countermand it and order us back on patrol pattern. He did not trust Fleet to make the right decision. He did not trust Fleet to make a fast decision, ma'am. Those are not the same. And on 69, he ordered full silence, because the packet had begun to answer. The cold thread in Threlva's membranes drew tight from her jaw to her tailbone. Answer. Yes, ma'am. In what way? It started addressing us by hull serial, ma'am. The 7 syllables changed. By 69, the packet was opening with our hull serial, followed by our captain's name, followed by what I am 90% sure was the formal Concord salutation a junior coordinator gives a senior. The captain ordered me not to translate the rest. He ordered me to log the band as failed and shut down. He ordered all outgoing comms killed. He ordered me to remove the cable from the long-range trunk and bring it to him personally. You did. I did, ma'am. He took it from you. He did, ma'am. He took the cable to his ready room. I did not see it again until day 73. It was on his bunk when the Marines went in for him. Did the cable show signs of having been examined? It had been opened, ma'am. The internal isolators had been pulled out and replaced with hard slugs. The captain had cooked the receiver. The cable was dead. And on the morning of day 70, he told the bridge he was going to take the cutter into the null and shut down her transponder and not come out, for any reason short of an answered countersign. Yes, ma'am. What is an answered countersign? Sabra Innes looked at her finally, with the small dark eyes very steady. A countersign, she said, is the 7 syllables he never told the bridge. Threlva opened her tertiary eye fully. He had a countersign. He had a countersign, ma'am. For what? For whoever was sending the packet. And he meant to wait in the null for the right answer. Yes, ma'am. And if it came? Sabra Innes looked at her panel. Then he was going to bring us out of the null and home, ma'am. And if it did not come, then he was going to keep us in the null until our air ran out, ma'am. He was going to keep the black cantata at the bottom of the null until the cutter died of breathing. And he was going to keep our transponder dark the entire time. And he was going to leave no record of any of it to Fleet. He was going to let us die quiet. The cold thread in Threlva's membranes pulled so tight she felt the small click in her own jawbone she had not felt since her first deep space dive in the academy. She made herself breathe. She made herself speak. Why? Sabra Innes turned all the way around on the stool now, and she put both her hands on her knees, and she looked Threlva in the eye, and she said, very evenly, because, ma'am, if we had come home with a single packet of the index addressed to our hull serial and our captain's name and one of your formal salutations, the index would have come home with us. Threlva did not move. And the index is what reads the survey packets that come out of the veil, ma'am. The captain has been tracking it for 19 years. It started as a single return ping from a Concorde scout that went missing in '07. The Concorde told us the scout had been lost to instrument failure. The captain believed that the scout was caught. He believes the index opened the scout and read every file on it, and that since '07 the index has been catching every ship that has crossed a certain line in the Vale 8 stretch and reading every file on every one of them and adding the names and the hull serials and the watch passwords and the captain's personal codes to itself. The captain believed the index has been building, slowly, patiently, for 19 years. Building what? A list, ma'am, of every ship that has ever crossed the line, of every face on every ship, of every name, of every voice, of every code. The index reads, ma'am. It does not destroy. It reads, and then it waits. And then when it has enough, it speaks. It uses the codes it has read. It uses the names it has read. It opens the cable. It comes in. The cold thread in Threlva's membranes did not pull tighter, because there was nowhere tighter for it to pull. It simply held. That is why he wanted no traffic out. Yes, ma'am. That is why he cooked the cable. Yes, ma'am. That is why he was going to take us into the null and not come out. Yes, ma'am. He believed the index could not reach into a null. He believed if he could deny it our codes and our names and our voices, and deny it any return traffic to track, and deny fleet any record of where we had gone, the index would lose the thread. He believed the cost of that was the cutter and her crew, and that the cost was acceptable because the alternative was the index using our codes to walk through a friendly dock seal somewhere and start reading every other ship in port. He intended to die. He intended to die quiet, ma'am. Why did he not say so on the bench? Sabra Innes was quiet for a long time. Then she said, because if he had said so on the bench, ma'am, the bench would have entered the 7 syllables into the court record, and the court record is uplinked to fleet at the close of every session. He would not let the syllables go on to the uplink. He had no way to argue his case without letting the syllables out, and he would not let the syllables out, so he did not argue his case. He let the court convict him. He sat there with his hands folded and he let it happen because the alternative was the index writing the court record home. Threlva did not move. She stood at the back of the comm room with her palms cold against the steel and her tertiary eye fully open and the dread in her membranes a thing that no longer had a category and no longer needed one. She said very quietly, "Comm officer." "Yes, ma'am. Where is the cable now?" "The cable is sealed in the captain's locker, ma'am." "The locker is in the salvage office on the spire. The Marines logged it as personal effects. The salvage office will hold it until the captain's medical discharge is processed, and then it will release it to his next of kin." "His next of kin? He has none registered, ma'am, so the cable will go to the dead storage archive." "Yes, ma'am." "And the dead storage archive is uplinked to fleet at the close of every quarter, ma'am, for inventory." Threlva closed her tertiary eye. She opened it again. She said, "Comm officer, when is the next quarter close?" Sabra Innes did not look at her panel. She did not need to. 41 hours from now, ma'am." Threlva did not say thank you. The Vraxen did not have a word for it that fit. She inclined her tertiary eye, the formal degree she had not used since the day she came aboard, and she walked out of the comm room, and she did not look back at Sabra Innes, because if she had looked back, she did not trust the membranes under her jaw not to show what she felt. The corridor outside the comm room was dim. The black cantata was on dock power, and dock power on a long-range cutter was set low to save the reactors, and the only light in the trunk was the small running lamps at the foot of each pressure door. Threlva walked through the dim trunk and felt, for the first time since she had come aboard, that the cutter was watching her. That was not, she told herself, a Concorde rational thing to feel. She felt it anyway. She got to the inner hatch at the foot of the gangway, and she keyed her observer's tag, and she stepped through onto the dock side, and the dock lamps came up bright and warm and ordinary. And she walked the length of the gallery toward the lift, and the lift took her down to the salvage office of the Salt Spire, where she had been once before, on her first day, when the dockmaster had asked her to identify a Concorde scout pin a tech had pulled out of the bilge of a return cutter and not known what to do. The salvage office was a long, low room with steel shelves along 3 walls and a duty clerk at a battered desk and a sliding window in the back where the personal effects of the dead and the discharged were held in numbered crates until paperwork either claimed them or sent them on to dead storage. The duty clerk was a young man in fleet grays who looked up from a slate and said, "Help you, coordinator." "Sub-coordinator," Threlva corrected by reflex. "I am here on observer business. I am here for the personal effects of Captain Renata's Holm of the Long Range. Cutter Black Cantata. The clerk looked at her for a long count. Then he said, Ma'am, with respect, the effects of a discharged officer aren't released to liaison personnel. They go to next of kin, or they go to dead storage. That's the regulation. I am not asking for release, Threlva said. I am asking to view. The clerk blinked. He looked at his slate. He scrolled. He said slowly, Liaison observer is entitled to view personal effects of a vessel of record at the discretion of the duty clerk. Reason for viewing required for the log. Reason, Threlva said. Conquer Terran liaison protocol. Post-incident inventory check. The clerk wrote it on his slate. He wrote it slowly as if he was hoping she would change her mind. She did not. He stood. He went through the sliding window into the back. She heard him moving crates. She heard him swear softly. She heard the rattle of a number plate against steel. He came back with a small gray duffel and a sealed bag and a clipboard. He laid them on the counter. Captain Holm, he said. Effects? Sign here, please, and here and initial here. Threlva signed. She initialed. Her translator approximated her name in Terran script. The clerk did not check it. He stepped back from the counter and folded his arms and looked deliberately at a point above her head. She opened the duffel. There was very little in it. A spare set of dress grays, folded precisely. A small leather shaving case. A worn paperback in archaic Terran. A photograph in a scratched frame. A dark-haired woman in fleet blacks on a dock. Her chin lifted, the glass cracked across her collarbone. Threlva closed the duffel. She opened the sealed bag. The sealed bag held the cable. The cable was a length of military comm trunk about the thickness of her wrist and the length of her forearm, coiled into a loose figure 8 and tagged with a yellow inspection slip that said Cable, Long-Range Trunk, Unusable, Retain. The casing was scorched along 2 of its 3 flats. The exposed end where the receiver should have been was a dark melted glob of polymer and slag. Threlva looked at the cable for a long time. Then she said, without looking up, Clerk, ma'am, this cable is logged for routing to dead storage at the next quarter close. Yes, ma'am. At what time will dead storage perform the inventory uplink to fleet? The clerk consulted his slate. 2340 hours. Day after tomorrow, ma'am. Threlva did not move, she said very softly. And if a Concord liaison observer were to lodge a formal hold on this item under liaison protocol? The clerk looked up. You can do that, ma'am. Concord Terran Review Track freezes the uplink for the item. 6 to 10 weeks. Lodge the hold. I will provide a reason now, in my own hand. The clerk slid the form across the counter. The receiver of this cable was deliberately destroyed by the captain of the vessel during a period in which he believed the cable to be carrying signal traffic from an entity referred to in his personal usage as the Index. I have reason to believe a dead storage inventory uplink of this cable to fleet may transmit residual signal data tagged to the cable's identifier. I request a hold on this item pending Concord Terran review. The clerk read it. He read it. Then he said, Ma'am, subcoordinator. Are you sure? I am sure. This is going to go up the chain. This is going to land on Captain Brass' desk by morning. He is not going to like it. I am sure. The clerk sealed the form, keyed the hold into his slate, stamped the bag with a red Concord hold plate, moved it to the under-review shelf, and locked the shelf with his thumb on the plate. He looked up at Threlva. Ma'am, may I speak freely? You may. You just put yourself between Brask and a thing he thinks is settled. I am aware, and you don't think the captain was crazy. Threlva did not answer. The clerk nodded once. He said, Have a good evening, subcoordinator, and he turned away and did not look at her again. Threlva walked out of the salvage office and through the long, low gallery toward the lift, and she did not feel the cold thread in her membranes loosen at all. If anything, it had tightened. She had bought a hold. She had bought 6 to 10 weeks. The cable would not go up on the quarter-close uplink. The cable would sit on the under-review shelf in a sealed bag with a red Concord hold plate on it and a duty clerk's thumb signature on the lock. That was the cable. That was one item. She had no idea yet how many other items she had to find. She rode the lift up. She went back to her quarters. Her quarters on the spire were small and warm and smelled of the soft cedar disc the Vraxen Concord issued to its officers to remind them of home. She did not light the disc tonight. She sat at the small desk, and she opened her slate, and she began methodically to walk back through the 70 days of the voyage in her own log. She had logged 17 orders. She had logged them in Concord formal, with the date and the rotation and the bridge watch and the exact phrasing. She read them now in order. She read them slowly. She read the first, day 3, passive only sweep through a routine listening grid. She had called it tactically irrational because it doubled time on sector. She read it again now and understood it was the sweep a captain ordered if he did not want the cutter to emit any active pulse the index could read. She read the second. Day 11, suspend all routine status check pings. She had called it procedurally improper. A status check ping carried, in its header, the cutter's full hull serial and her current position to 3 decimals. She read the third. She read the fourth. She read all 17. 11 were signal discipline orders. 3 of the 4 procedural improprieties had been failures to report routine status to fleet. The one order she had testified about, the off-pattern course change on day 68, was the only one of the 17 that had not, in some way, been a signal discipline order. It had been an evasion. Threlva sat at the small desk in her small quarters and looked at her own log, and understood, finally, that for 70 days she had been observing a man trying to keep his ship from being read, and had been logging every move he made as a deviation from the protocols of being read. The dread in her membranes tightened to a point that hurt. She closed her slate. She did not light the cedar disk. She sat in the dark for a long count. The spire hummed around her. She heard the slow change of a duty watch somewhere overhead. She heard a Marine laugh, far off, and another Marine answer. Then she opened her slate again. She brought up the Concorde Scout Band. The one NS had said the packets came in on. The band was decommissioned. The Concorde had taken it out of service in 07. She knew that. She queried the archive. The archive said the band had been decommissioned because the scouts that used it had stopped returning. 3 in 07, 2 in 09, 4 in 11, all listed as instrument failure. The Concorde had decommissioned the band entirely in 14 and moved its remaining listening assets to a higher band and had lost no further assets on the lower band, because by then no Concorde asset was on the lower band to lose. She read the archive twice. She queried for the 7 syllables Innes had said the packets carried. The archive returned nothing. She queried for the 7 syllables phonetically. The archive returned, after a long pause, a single match. The match was in an old training aid file from the Concorde Scout Academy, dated 05. The file was a list of standard scout greetings on the lower band. The match was the formal opening greeting a junior scout used when checking in to a parent station for the first time. The greeting translated in Concorde formal as, "I am here, please acknowledge." The index had been broadcasting the formal opening greeting of a Concorde scout on the decommissioned band for 19 years. The index had been speaking with the voice of every Concorde scout it had read. Threlva closed her slate. She sat in the dark. She did not move for a very long time. When she moved at last, she stood. She put on her dress grays. She clipped her observer's tag back to her collar, and she walked out of her quarters and back along the long curving gallery toward the inquiry wing, because there was one more thing she had to do tonight before she slept, and she did not believe she would sleep at all. She had to see the captain. He was being held in the spire's medical wing, in a flat, low room at the end of the 3rd corridor, behind a pressure door and a Marine and a stenographer's slate that recorded every visitor for the medical discharge file. The Marine looked up when Threlva approached. He keyed the duty log. He said, "Subcoordinator, he's not under restraint. He's not talking. The discharge psychiatrist has been in twice today. You sure you want to do this?" "I am sure. He's not going to talk to you, ma'am." "I am not coming to make him talk." The Marine looked at her for a long count. Then he nodded. He stepped aside. He keyed the pressure door. The door sighed open. Captain Renatus Holmes sat at a small steel table in a low room with a single overhead lamp and a single barred window onto a service corridor and a single hard chair across from his. He was in the same dress grays he had worn in court. He had not been allowed his collar pin. He had not been allowed his sidearm. He had not been allowed his belt. His hands were folded on the table in front of him the way they had been, folded through 3 days of testimony. His eyes were on a point above the lamp. Threlva stood inside the door. She did not move to the chair. She said in Concorde formal, very quietly, "Captain Holm." Holm did not look at her. She said in her own ordinary voice, "I lodged a hold on the cable. The dead storage uplink for that item will not run on the quarter close. The cable will not go up. I have given the salvage office a reason in my own hand. The reason is the index." Holm did not move. She said, "I came down here to tell you that. I do not require you to answer. I do not require you to look at me. I came down because I do not want you to die thinking that no one heard you." There was a long count. Then Captain Holm, very slowly, lowered his eyes from the point above the lamp and looked, for the first time since the 3rd bell, at Subcoordinator Threlva Isun of the Vraxen Concorde. His eyes were gray. They were very tired. They were very still, he said, in a voice she had not heard since the morning of day 70 before the order, when he had stopped her at the wardroom door to ask whether she had slept well. Subcoordinator. Captain, you held the cable. I did. For how long? 6 to 10 weeks. Conquered Terran review. The uplink for that item is frozen. And the inventory. The inventory line for that item is locked under a red plate. The duty clerk's thumb signed the lock at 22:40 hours tonight. Holmes' eyes did not move from her face. He said, Subcoordinator, there is another cable. The cold thread in Threlva's membranes drew tight in a new place. Another. Brask, Holmes said. He did not raise his voice. He did not change his tone. Brask has a cable. He took it from the secondary trunk in the auxiliary scrubber room on day 69. He did not log it. He did not turn it in with mine. I saw him take it. I did not say anything. I believed at the time he was taking it to me. He was not. He kept it. It is on the cutter. Where on the cutter? In his sea chest. He does not know I saw him. Why did he take it? Holmes closed his eyes. He opened them again. Because, he said, Brask believes the index can be reasoned with. He believes that with a disciplined officer at a controlled receiver, the codes can be run back, the index identified, classified, and engaged. He believes it is a state actor with a file on the outer reach that can be brought to the table. He believes this because he is a good officer and a careful man, and he has never been wrong before. I have failed to persuade him for 19 years. I tried to take the cutter into the null because I had failed. Brask is the man the panel commended today. Yes, Brask is the man who will lift the black cantata at 6th bell tomorrow. Yes, with the cable in his sea chest. With the cable in his sea chest active, the receiver intact, the isolators intact. The codes the index has been broadcasting since '07 still on the trunk it was pulled from. He will not break it. He will study it. He will run a controlled test in transit. He will run the codes back. And when he runs the codes back, Holmes closed his eyes. Then, he said, the index will be inside the hull. Threlva did not breathe for 3 full counts. She said, 6th bell tomorrow. Yes. And the cutter goes back to Veilate. Yes. And Brask will run the test on the way out. Brask will run the test 3 rotations out, beyond hail of the spire. 7 minutes. After the 7 minutes, the black cantata will be exactly what she was meant not to be. A clean hull with Terran transponder and a friendly handshake, with the index on her bridge in the captain's name. She will sail home. She will dock. The next cutter that pulls into the cradle next to her will take the handshake, and the next, and by year's end the index will be in every long-range hull in the outer reach. The Concorde and the Reach will never know. The index does not destroy, it reads, and it waits. Threlva looked at him. She said very quietly, What do you require me to do? Holmes did not answer for a long count. Then he said, You're an observer. You have liaison standing. You can lodge a second hold. You can lodge it on the cutter. On the cutter, on the black cantata. The cutter is not yet released to a new master. Brask has been named the commanding officer in court, but the formal transfer of the hull does not occur until the 7th bell tomorrow, when the dockmaster signs off the readiness packet. Between 6th and 7th bell, the cutter sits in the cradle under no master. During that hour, a liaison observer can lodge a hold on the hull itself. A hold on the hull will freeze the readiness packet. It will freeze the lift. It will give you a window. A window for what? For the Marines to search the executive officer's sea chest. Threlva's tertiary eye was wide. You want me to lodge a hold on a Terran warship and have the Marines search a Terran officer who was commended by the court today? I want you, Holmes said very quietly, to do what I cannot. She looked at him for a long count. She said, Why did you not tell the court? Because the court would not have believed me. You did not give them a chance to. The court was Brask's court. Brask had drafted the Article 41 report. Brask had testified for 3 days. The court had commended him. The court was going to give Brask the cutter. If I had given the court the syllables, the court would have entered them in the record. The record would have gone up on the close of session uplink. The syllables would have been broadcast in the clear to every fleet relay between here and the Reach, and the index would have heard itself addressed by the court of a Terran spire. I could not. You let the court convict you. I let the court convict me. You let the court give the cutter to a man who is going to put the index in the hull. I had no other move on the board. You have one now. Holmes did not answer. He closed his eyes. He opened them. He said, in the voice of a man who has been waiting to say something for 19 years and is no longer sure he can, Subcoordinator, if you lodge the hold and you are wrong, you will end your service. You will be recalled to the Concorde, and you will not be sent out again. I am aware. If you lodge the hold and you are correct, You will end Brask's service. He will be relieved. He will be questioned. He will be discharged. He will not understand. He will believe to the day of his medical that you destroyed him out of error. I am aware. You have no obligation to do this. The court has thanked you for your cooperation. The court has closed. The court has closed, Threlva said. The cable has not. There was a long silence. Then Captain Renatus Holm, formerly commanding the long-range cutter Black Cantata, lowered his eyes from her face and looked at his folded hands on the steel table and said, very quietly, she went. She walked back through the medical wing, past the Marine, who did not ask what had been said, and through the gallery to the Spire's liaison desk. She woke the night clerk, filled out the form, signed it, initialed it, and wrote the reason in her own hand. The clerk read it without a question, stamped it, and woke the duty marshal. The marshal made one comm call. The dockmaster read the form on her slate at 0440 and walked, in stained jumpsuit and unbrushed hair, to Bay 9. By 5th bell, the Marines were on the cutter. By 5th and a half, they had opened Lieutenant Commander Brask's sea chest. By 6th bell, when the readiness packet was supposed to be signed, the dockmaster was on the gangway with the cable in her hand and her face very still. And the receiver of the cable was intact, and the isolators were intact, and a small green light at the cable's base was, the Marines confirmed with the comm chief from the duty boat tied up at the next bay, very faintly on, faintly receiving, faintly waiting. The dockmaster sealed the cable in a hard slug bag and called for the Spire's signal warfare officer, and the signal warfare officer arrived at 6th and a half bell with 3 techs, and they walked the cable to the Spire's hot lab, and they ran a controlled trace on it through a one-way isolation block, and at 7th bell the signal warfare officer came out of the lab with her face the color of cold ash and asked the duty marshal very quietly where the captain was. The captain was not in his medical room. The captain was in the long low room behind the pressure door at the end of the 3rd corridor, and he was sitting at the small steel table with his hands folded, and the Marine outside the pressure door had not let anyone in but Threlva, and Threlva was still standing inside against the wall, where she had been since she walked back from the liaison desk at 4th and a half bell, because she had not wanted Captain Renatus Holm to be alone while she did what she had told him she was going to do. The signal warfare officer was let through the pressure door at 7th and a half bell. She did not sit. She stood in front of Captain Holm at attention. She said, a voice that did not entirely work, "Captain, with respect, the receiver on the cable in Lieutenant Commander Brask's sea chest was live. It has been live since the executive officer pulled the cable on day 69 of the voyage. The 7-syllable signal you described to Subcoordinator Isun is on it, in real time, addressed to the Black Cantata's hull serial. The signal is currently broadcasting a formal Concord Scout salutation to a senior coordinator. It is asking us, sir, to acknowledge." Captain Holm raised his eyes from his folded hands. He looked at the signal warfare officer. He said, "Do not, sir, do not acknowledge. Do not transmit. Cook the receiver. Burn the cable in vacuum. Vent the residue. Log nothing on the close of session uplink. Tell fleet only that the cable was destroyed in a salvage accident. Do not transcribe the syllables. Hold the cutter 1 rotation. Strip every cable on the long-range trunk that was open on day 69. Burn the originals, the way the fleet burns biohazard. Sir, do you understand, officer?" "I understand, sir. Go," she went. The pressure door sighed shut behind her. Captain Renatus Holm lowered his eyes again to his folded hands. Threlva stood against the wall. She said very quietly, "Captain!" He did not look up. She said, "Brask. Brask will be relieved at the 8th bell," Helm said. "He will not understand. He will believe, to the day of his medical, that I and a Concord observer destroyed his career out of an error. He will not be entirely wrong. You did not go around him. I did." He looked up at her. "Yes, subcoordinator, you did. And the cutter will lift 3 rotations from now with a clean trunk and a new executive officer, and she will go back into Veil 8, and she will sit in the null with her transponder dark, and when she comes home she will not bring the index with her. You did it on a hold and a thumb signature at 4:40 in the morning. You did it because a comm officer said 3 words to you on a gangway." He paused. He said, "I am not going to thank you, subcoordinator. The Vraxen do not have a word for it. The Terrans have one. It would mean nothing in this room. I am going to ask you, instead, to do one last thing. Ask. When the cable burns in vacuum, stand on the cradle gantry. Watch it burn. Confirm to yourself with your own eyes that the receiver is dead. Then walk back to your quarters. Light the cedar disc. Sleep. You have not slept for 31 hours, and you are going to be asked in 2 weeks to testify before a Concord review board on what was done in this spire tonight, and you will not be able to answer well if you do not sleep first. Will you do this? I will. Go. She went. She walked back through the medical wing past the Marine, who this time looked at her, and through the gallery to Bay 9. The cradle gantry was open. The dockmaster was on it with the cable in a hard slug bag and a service drone at her elbow. She looked at Threlva. Threlva looked back. The dockmaster nodded once. The drone took the cable into the vacuum chamber and laid it on the burn plate. The cable burned in vacuum for 11 minutes. The receiver burned for 3. When it was done, the dockmaster vented the chamber, and the residue went out through the spire's slag vent into the long dark of dockside space, where the small bright debris cloud of 17 decades of cable burns hung in a slow drifting halo around the spire's spine, indistinguishable from any other. Threlva watched the residue go. She watched until the small bright cloud thinned into the larger one. Then she walked back to her quarters. She lit the cedar disc. The small warm scent of home filled the small room. She lay down on the narrow human cot she had been issued for the duration of her secondment, and she closed her tertiary eye, and she closed her primary eyes, and she lay in the dim quiet for a long count. She did not sleep at once. She thought very deliberately of the 70 days in order. She thought of Captain Holm meeting her at the airlock with his straight mouth and his still eyes. She thought of the 17 orders. She thought of the cold coffee in his left hand. She thought of his voice on day 70, flat and very calm, saying he was going to take the cutter into the null. She thought of Brask's hand on his sidearm. She thought of her own testimony at the bench. She thought of the verdict. She thought of the cable, burning in vacuum. She thought of the small, bright cloud thinning into the larger one. She thought of Sabra Innes in her hood at her panel, saying 3 words on a gangway. He was right, ma'am. She thought of the Concord Scout Band, and the 7 syllables, and the formal greeting of a junior scout asking a parent station, in the voice of every scout the index had read, to please acknowledge. She did not acknowledge. She lay in the dim quiet of her quarters in the salt spire, and she did not acknowledge, and somewhere across the spire, in a long, low room behind a pressure door at the end of the 3rd corridor, Captain Renatus Holmes sat at a small steel table with his folded hands and his very tired eyes, and he did not acknowledge either, and the index, for the first time in 19 years, was not being answered by anyone in the outer reach. Threlva opened her tertiary eye one last time, in the dim, and she looked at the small warm flame of the cedar disc on her desk, and she thought in Concord formal, in her own language, in her own head, the only thing she had not yet allowed herself to think. The court had been wrong. The captain had been right, and the dread in her membranes loosened at last by a single notch, only one. The rest would take longer. She knew that now. The rest was a thing she would carry the way Captain Holm had carried it for 19 years, in his folded hands, in his very still eyes, in the silence he had kept on the bench while 3 days of testimony had buried him, because the alternative had been to let the syllables out. She had bought him his silence. She had bought the outer reach a window. She had bought the black cantata a clean trunk and a quiet lift and a long lane back into Vale 8, with her transponder dark and her cable burnt, and the index for the first time in 19 years not riding her hull. It was enough for tonight. It was not, she understood, enough for tomorrow. But tomorrow she would do tomorrow's work. Tonight she would sleep, the way her captain had asked her to. She closed her tertiary eye in the dim warm scent of cedar, and she slept. And the black cantata sat in her cradle in Bay 9 with her trunks open and her cables stripped, and the salt spire turned, slowly, around its long-lit spine, and out beyond Vale 8 the index went on broadcasting its 7 syllables into a band no one was listening on, asking, in the voice of every scout it had ever read, for someone, anyone please, to acknowledge. No one did.